Catovic, we're in Morocco, a predominantly Muslim country. Tell us give us the two best teachings from Islam about the protection of the environment, the care for the earth.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with all of you. I guess comes to mind two. One is Inni ja'ilukum fil ardi khalifa, that God has placed all of you as human beings as, and it's often translated into the English language as vicegerents, but I think a much more appropriate translation would be caretakers and caregivers on the earth, and he has done this to see what you will do with it. And then I think maybe a second verse that comes to mind is وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ يَمْشُونَ عَنِ الْأَرْضِ حَوْنًا. The servants of the merciful are those who walk upon the earth softly. In a modern understanding, this would be who have a very low impact lifestyle upon the earth and do not increase in any way their carbon footprint. So I think these two verses come to mind quickly as two of several teachings in Islam with regard to the environment and environmental consciousness.
That's great. So, Tomás, from a Catholic perspective, we all noticed that the Pope had a little bit to say last year about caring for our common home. Give us sort of a few examples from Laudato Si, his encyclical.
Totally. So, thanks, Fletcher. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the UN Foundation for hosting this today. So yes, as you well say, Pope Francis last year had a lot of attention because he published this encyclical letter called Laudato Si. An encyclical is, let's call it a book. It's a teaching document in which he laid out the Catholic perspective on caring for creation, on caring for our common home. So I would say there are a few key things from that document. I'll try to keep it short. On one side, the concept of caring for our common home, of framing the environment as our common home, as the home that all of us share, is a key element. And this is very related to the point of a key quote from Laudato Si is, everything is interconnected. This interconnectedness of beings, this interconnectedness of issues. He also makes a lot of emphasis on the ecological crisis as being both social and environmental. So he stresses really hard, really strongly, this point that this is a social justice issue. So he actually, one of the most famous or most quoted quotes from Laudato Si is, hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, framing this as we are not only harming the environment and creation, I mean, that's terrible by itself, but also we're harming, most importantly, our brothers and sisters in poverty.
And yeah, the beauty of the writing in Laudato Si was an incredible gift to all of us. There were any number of lines that were just real zingers in the best sense. So Gopal, from a contemporary document, a religious document on the environment, one of the best beloved spiritual classics in the history of the world is the Bhagavad Gita. What does the Gita have to say that relates to our caring for Mother Earth, Mother Bhumi, as Hindus say?
Thank you, Fletcher. It's a pleasure to be here. The Gita is full of nuggets of wisdom when it comes to caring for the earth. Two that really inspire me and what we try to infuse in our work with Hindu communities is when Krishna in the Gita talks about how he is present in the natural world, where he says he is the mountains, he is the taste of water, he is the heat in the sun. He talks about how he is present everywhere and how we can perceive the Lord throughout the natural world. That's very inspiring. And then on another level, he talks to his friend Arjuna in the Gita about his circle of influence, how everybody has a responsibility to act in the world and everybody should do what they can to make the world a better place. And I think these two teachings from the Gita, at least for me, are very powerful, that the Lord is everywhere, he can be perceived in nature, and we all have a duty to make the world a better place according to the skills and the talents that we have.
And recently you had an article on CNN.com about a Hindu response to the festival, a Hindu environmental response to the festival of Diwali. Give everybody a two-sentence definition of what Diwali is, and then tell us a little bit about what you said in that article.
Sure. So Diwali was just celebrated 2 weeks ago. It's a festival for Hindus and Sikhs and Jains, and it's kind of summarized as the festival of goodness over bad or light over dark. And so across India and the Hindu world, lights are lit to show that goodness has overcome darkness. And so in this, as you mentioned, in this op-ed that I wrote for CNN, I talked about the need for Hindus and for India specifically to embrace solar light. So not the light of God or other forms of light, but solar energy, and the need for India to really rapidly increase its adoption of solar energy to reach the 300 million people in India who don't have electricity at the moment. And I think for India and for Hindus, this is one of the crucial things that they can do now when we're talking about climate change and minimizing the impact, is to ramp up adoption of solar technology.
And it also gets to what Tomás was talking about in terms of lifting people out of poverty also. I mean, there's 1.2 billion people around the world without access to electricity. They need that access. And someone told me that you had ideas about trying to raise some support for a solar-powered rickshaw run in India. Say just a few sentences about that.
Right, so if you've been to India, you would have seen the tuk-tuk rickshaws across India and other parts of the world around there. So this coming year in 2017, we're planning to do a solar rickshaw run where we have sourced a solar rickshaw from a company in Bangalore, and we want to do a run across the country, starting in Jaipur, going to Delhi, then Agra, and ending in Varanasi on Diwali Day. And so that's something we're planning to do this year to raise awareness about solar technology, about how powerful, how transformative it can be, and just as you mentioned, how it can lift people out of poverty and really address one of the crucial aspects of climate change.
Now, Tomás, the Global Catholic Climate Movement, which you co-founded and which you direct, has done some really interesting work recently working with Catholic institutions on their investments and what they will or won't invest in. Share a little bit about that and what's been accomplished and what those conversations have been like, what issues they've raised.
Totally. So this is the so-called campaign of fossil fuel divestment. It's calling, and it's important to note that this is a very big campaign, that it's not only about faith institutions, it's about a whole range of institutions in society that are being called to move away their investments from fossil fuel companies to clean energy companies on the grounds that right now we cannot continue burning more fossil fuels, basically, and that we have massive amounts of fossil fuels in the reserves that were already discovered. And so here there's a point that we simply cannot burn those fossil fuels, and we need to thus stop investing in that kind of companies. So, and in the past few months, it's been very encouraging to see that lots of Catholic institutions and we should recognize first that many other faith institutions, such as the World Council of Churches, the Lutheran World Federation, very recently the Islamic Society of North America, and many others have been taking this bold stance, divesting from fossil fuels, and we're seeing a lot of action in the Catholic community. As a response to Laudato Si of this encyclical letter of Pope Francis, he explicitly calls to phase out fossil fuels. We need to stop burning fossil fuels, and Catholic institutions are just connecting the dots. I mean, if that's the call of Laudato Si, we simply need to stop investing in this kind of industry.
And what sort of response have you got to that? Because my experience is that when you start to talk about money, people get funny. It's one thing to have an abstract moral conversation, but when you start talking about dollars and cents, so to speak, that's when you really find out where people stand. So give us a sense of the range of reactions you've seen.
It's interesting. Yeah, there are all kind of reactions, and it's pretty uncomfortable for any kind of institutions. I mean, let's keep in mind universities, pension funds, etc. There's so many institutions that are being asked to make this decision, and you get responses ranging from we need to care for our returns, so we need to continue investing in the fossil fuel industry because that's a profitable thing to do. But that's of course not true. We're seeing actually that those who have divested are actually doing better. And especially if you keep in mind this concept of the carbon bubble, that governments, I mean, here at COP22, behind this wall are discussing how to get rid of fossil fuels, and they start putting regulations that will actually force fossil fuel companies to leave those fuels in the ground. So actually that economic case doesn't really make sense. So you get that kind of responses. You get, also responses in terms of needing to engage fossil fuel companies to change behavior, but that's I praise that some institutions are doing that, but we have to keep in mind that this is not about the practices of this industry. This is about their core product. So yeah, and it's very interesting to see that a lot of momentum is coming up. I mean, a lot of institutions will be doing, we'll see much more action on this front in the coming year.
Well, and as you mentioned, Imam Catovic, tell us a little bit, because it was quite a remarkable announcement recently from the Islamic Society of North America about fossil fuel divestment, and we know that you were a very important part of that conversation. Share with us a little bit about the decision that was made and the reasoning that was used to support it.
Sure. One of the hats that I wear here at the COP22 here in Marrakesh is board member of the Islamic Society of North America's Green Mosque Task Force, which reports directly to the ISNA executive. Now, ISNA, for those who don't know, is the oldest umbrella organization of Muslim organizations in America, and largest. It was founded in its initial form in 1963. And it has been very active on many, many fronts over the years, and it has many constituent and affiliate organizations, professional organizations, etc. So it's been an ongoing process with ISNA in terms of moving itself and moving the Muslim community in America forward towards a more environmentally conscious practice, both as individuals as well as community members. So early on, we had the mosque, we had what was called the Green Ramadan Initiative. And that helps to encourage Muslims to adopt more ecological friendly practices during the month of Ramadan that are in keeping with the prophetic lifestyle of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Including, for example, conservation of water, less meat, more vegetables in diets for the iftars, energy conservation, and other types of practices that lessen our impact upon the earth. That sort of expanded into the whole idea of the Green Mosque Project, and that is to retrofit existing mosques. There are approximately 2,000 mosques in the United States of America. To retrofit existing mosques to be more environmentally efficient and effective, and in any of the construction of new mosques to implement a green building principles, so that the devices, the electrical systems, et cetera, that are put in are ones that will reduce consumptions. And so that's sort of an ongoing project. But when they began to revisit this issue about the fossil fuel burning, and especially when recently it's come to our attention, and it seems to be a growing scientific consensus on this, that 50 to 75% of the fossil fuels, which includes natural gas, oil, and coal, that are already known to exist, need to remain in the ground, cannot be taken out of the ground, in order for us, with all the other activities that are going on to reduce our carbon footprint, us as a human civilization, as the human race. And we do believe in this type of race in Islam. There is the human race. We don't associate ourselves with those who hold to one race over another, except if they're talking about the human race as a whole. And that needs to stay in the ground. All the efforts of conservation, the ethic of restraint that our religion and other faith traditions teach. We have the saying in our religion, it has to do with food, but it has to do with everything that's connected to food. Kulu washrabu wa la tusrifu, the Quran says. Eat, drink, but don't exceed. Inna Allah la yuhibbul musrifin. God does not love those who are the wasters. So waste is linked to consumption lifestyles, behavioral consumption behaviors, etc. But even if all that is put in place and all of that is good and necessary, it is not sufficient for us to meet the challenge that lies before the human race, which is to keep the temperature of the earth at 1.5. CO2 has to be kept in the ground. So given that the Islamic Society of North America adopted the and had decided to commit itself fully to divest from all of its financial funds and assets, divest from all sorts of fossil fuel assets. Those can be found written in short of what's known as a Carbon 200 Underground. These are various companies that in one way or another are connected to the fossil fuel industry. And to reinvest part of that funds in renewable clean energy solutions. It is not enough in our religion of Islam, as I understand it, and I have been taught from my teachers and my sheikhs, to stop a bad practice without substituting in its place a good practice. Our religion is always about negation, but it's followed quickly by affirmation. You stop the bad in order to replace it with that which is better or that which is good. If you only stop the bad, it is only a half job. So you need to complete the circle. And so I was very honored and proud that this institution, I think, is the first Islamic institution in the world that has actually gone down this road. And I was very pleased when I came here to Morocco to find that the idea or the concept of greening our mosques and transforming mosques to a energy source that is fully 100% based upon renewable energies is a project that's right underway here in Morocco and was announced shortly before the COP that 700 of the mosques in Morocco are in the process of transforming fully to renewable energy sources. And of course, along with that goes the practices associated with that. Just one more point I'd like to mention. I was at the Friday Jummah prayer service here in the Qutubiyya Mosque, and it was wonderful to hear from the Mimbar, which is a symbolic place of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, probably one of the most pivotal locations in terms of religious teaching in Islam for someone to speak from. It is the pulpit of pulpits, the Friday Mosque Mimbar. And to hear the Imam reminding us all about our responsibility to creation, to nature, and about the harms of carbon emissions and what's now known as called ground ozone or the smog, etc., in affecting the health of our children. So the environmental themes on various aspects were touched on, and I was told that this was actually done nationwide in mosques throughout this country, and the people who organized that for the Ministry of Religious Affairs and others within the Moroccan government and the religious community really should be congratulated for their efforts in that regard.
So that's a very courageous step forward by the Islamic Society of North America. I'm wondering to take the conversation in a slightly different direction. Our viewers will have noticed that we are all male. And I think that we want to touch on for a couple of moments some of the particular contributions that women religious and the Catholic community have made in this religious environmental movement. Let's start, though, Gopal, with you in terms of you've been doing some thinking about a project called Devi, and perhaps say a little bit about, from a theological level as well as any other way you'd like, about the role of the feminine and the role of women and why this issue matters from a Hindu perspective in that regard.
Sure, it's a really good point. As you mentioned, this Devi campaign that we're looking to develop for Hindu women, we know that the more marginalized the community internationally, the more likely they are to feel the effects of climate change. And between men and women, women are more vulnerable to the effects. So we want to uplift and empower women to become the leaders within the Hindu community against climate change. We know in India and other parts of what we call the developing world, women play, a role more than men in terms of the finances of the household, getting the food, getting the water, raising the children. Their role is very significant. And so we want to say, let's use that power, let's use that significant role they have in society to be agents and activists of change. And you mentioned from a theological point of view, within Hinduism, God is not male and God is not female, God is both. Both needs to be there for there to be harmony. So within Hindu theology and traditions, every male depiction of God is always accompanied by a feminine. So with Krishna, there is Radha. With Narayan, there is Lakshmi. With Shiva, there is Parvati. So the male and female energies of the Absolute are always together. And so an overt focus, or consciously or unconsciously, on the male aspects of divinity actually put things out of sync. They don't keep things in balance. So the feminine needs to be worshipped, the feminine needs to be connected with. And so therefore that's why the earth, if we look at Hindu views of nature, of the world, we see that the earth is feminine, Mother Bhumi, Mother Earth. The mountains are feminine, the rivers are feminine, Mother Ganges, Mother Yamuna, the river Yamuna. And so therefore there's a real need to reconnect with that. And I feel in the climate movement and just generally that's been neglected to a large extent. And we're hearing increasingly, not just from the Hindu climate change movement, but also from indigenous voices as well, that the feminine has to be embraced if we are to find a more holistic and realistic approach and solution to the crisis that we're facing.
And Tomás, you've recently, with colleagues, founded and launched the Global Catholic Climate Movement. We also know that we are all in this movement in the debt of women religious, in particular from the Catholic community, who've been doing this work for many, many years and who've been lifting up these issues. Say a little bit about the significance of that in the Catholic community and also beyond.
Totally. So yeah, I agreed with all Gopal's points, all very nice points. It's interesting to see actually that in the Catholic community, religious sisters are by far the most committed. For example, 2 weeks ago, Standing Rock in North Dakota and the U.S., there's this big climate struggle of an indigenous community standing up to an energy company with this pipeline going through their community. And there was a big clergy gathering to support this Standing Rock community. And in the Catholic group, it was mostly religious sisters who were there. And this is just one example. I wouldn't say it's only, but you see a strong leadership from religious sisters. And also, among lay people, you see a lot of, especially mothers. Climate change it would be interesting actually to see what are the stats of climate awareness and climate action in civil society overall. I'm pretty sure that women would be there in larger numbers than men. Just because I think there's here more awareness about caring for the future of our children, that simply women just get it more than men, unfortunately. Would be great if everybody got it. And something also interesting in this regard from Laudato Si is that in creation care writing in the Catholic community and Christian, I think as well, the concept of environmental stewardship was a strong concept for a long time. And if you read Laudato Si, the Pope's document, the word stewardship or being stewards of creation is not really there that much. It's only mentioned like twice. And instead, the concept that is used is care. So actually, the tagline of Laudato Si is care for a common home. So by definition, if you look at those two words, stewarding and caring, you could say that probably there's a male connotation to stewardship about caring for it and defending it and protecting it from a very male perspective, rather than caring, which is much more, I think, life-giving, and it's a different angle. So that's a very interesting development from Laudato Si, actually. And you see the word care used dozens and dozens of times versus stewardship.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And another thing that struck many of us about Laudato Si also was the Pope's repeated use of the word beautiful or beauty in relationship to the earth. And I wonder, I've been told over the years by many people that one of the things that religious communities offer to the broader environmental movement is this space in which to appreciate the remarkable beauty and gift that the earth is. Say, from a Catholic perspective, and how does that figure in your thinking and in what motivates you around this work?
Totally. Yeah, that's brilliant, actually. This is something that has been missing, I think, from the climate movement, from the environmental movement, seeing creation, nature as this beautiful gift that we need to care for. And yes, as you well say, Laudato Si, Pope Francis repeatedly uses this word of beauty, of looking with awe at creation, being letting ourselves be surprised by the beauty of creation. And that would allow us to develop, and this is related also to the concept of ecological conversion. So this is something that St. John Paul II coined in the 90s, this concept of ecological conversion, that we need to undergo our own ecological conversion. And part of that process is, reconnecting with creation, and part of that reconnection is spending time in nature and just being marveled by the beauty of creation. And that, what Pope Francis says in Laudato Si, is that this ecological conversion will allow us to have a much more meaningful commitment to caring for creation. Once we develop this relationship, much deeper and meaningful relationship with creation, we'll be able to be much more committed to it and spend much more time and make, as Brother Saffet said, in terms of self-restraining, we need to restrain ourselves, and we need that motivation that I think ultimately needs to be nurtured by this being marveled by the beauty of creation.
We're much more likely to take care of something to which we feel deeply and profoundly connected. So now Saffet, within Arabic, there's a word that is translated meaning sign. And it's very often used in reference to the Quran. The Quran, the sacred book of Islam, is a sign that points towards Allah. But it's also used in an additional way. And I wonder, talk a little bit about that word and the significance of the couple of ways it's used.
Okay. Specifically, the word you're referring to is ayah. Ayah is the term which is used for a sentence in the Holy Quran, or verse. It is also the same word which is used for anything within nature or a natural phenomena. Within ayati, and among his signs are. And it could be something physical, occurrence in nature. It could be also a relationship. For example, love between a mother and a child, love between a husband and a wife is also referred to as a sign. So an interesting idea is that and this has some connection to the Catholic tradition as I understand it, of the book of Revelation and the book of creation type of thing. And it has its parallels in Islamic theology, that as we read the verses of the Holy Quran, and Muslims are taught to respect the Quran, believing that it is the word of God, in word and in meaning, that at the same time we are encouraged to look out into the natural world in which we live and to read those verses in the natural world. And connected to this is and there are 700 such verses that appear in the Holy Quran. And in connection to this is a statement of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that seeks to sacralize the world beyond the confines of the walls and of the structure of the mosque. He mentioned in one of his sayings that something that has been given to me that had not been given to my brothers among the prophets who came before me, in reference to the prophets that Muslims hold in the highest regard from the other faith traditions. Some of their names we know, some we don't, but like, for example, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and so on. That what I was given is that the entire earth has been made, kulluha masjida. The entire earth has been made, al-ard kulluha masjidan, has been made a place of prayer for me. So wherever you are in the world, and the time for prayer comes in, a time which is calculated not by looking at our watches or at our cell phones, but looking at the skies, depending on where the sun is within the sky. It's always connected to the movement of the sun between dawn and dusk. Orient yourself in the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca and engage in prayer. This idea that the temple threshold has been expanded to include the entire earth means as we treat our houses of worship as Muslims as sacred, we must treat the entire earth as sacred. And in that, in the mosques here in Morocco, you'll have, and in every mosque you'll have what they call masahif, which are copies of the Quran that you can come and you can read while you're waiting for the prayer to begin or after the prayer as a form of worship. But those same verses in a different context are the verses that are just outside the door. So as we respect the verses of the Quran, Muslims are encouraged to respect the verses within nature and to connect to that natural world, which unfortunately is being destroyed as we speak. We're doing this interview for about 30 minutes. At least one, if not two, distinct species of creation have ceased to exist. My son, my grandson, my granddaughter, my daughter may never come to know them. May never come to know them. They've ceased to exist. Their voices have been silenced. And it's not just because of the natural evolutionary processes. Those take a lot longer for this type of extinction to take place. Fossil fuel burning has disrupted the balance that we're all interconnected in and related to. And in that disruption is a weakening of the web of life, which is necessary for all life, including our own. And it's a depriving of the world of some of, in our tradition of Islam, some not only of fellow creatures, but also of fellow worshipers of God.
So we should start to wrap up in the in the next couple of minutes, but and Gopal, I would love to hear from you, because it seems to me as someone from the Abrahamic traditions that Hinduism has this wonderful exuberant joy in recognizing the presence of the sacred everywhere. Say just a couple of words about this connection with the theme of the presence of the divine in nature from a Hindu perspective, and then we'll start to do a final go-round with one final question for each of you.
Sure. Yes, you're right. Hinduism does talk about the presence of the sacred everywhere, in the trees, in the plants, in the oceans, in the animals. And it's connecting back to the beauty and connection. The reason that the sacred is in everything is so that Hindus, and not just Hindus, but people who look at the world this way, create connection and relationship with the natural world. It's very difficult to cause harm if we have relationship with something. If I disconnect myself to the oceans, to the trees, to the mountains, I can exploit and cause harm to those. But if I'm connected to those through relationship, direct relationship and relationship through God or the Supreme, then I'll think twice before I pollute the oceans. I'll think twice before I blow up the next mountain for mining. I'll think twice before I exploit animals for food or for clothing. And so this divine is everywhere, and Hinduism says we should recognize that, not just recognize it, but develop a genuine, loving relationship with all of the natural world. Only then can we stop and reduce our harm that we're causing.
So as a way of now starting to wrap up our conversation, it's been difficult over the last week to escape the sense, for those of us who care about these issues, to escape the sense of fear and disappointment on quite a profound level in relationship to the election that happened in the United States. And it so happens that a day after those election results were announced, an interfaith statement was released here in Marrakesh, signed by over 250 faith leaders, eminent faith leaders from the world's spiritual and religious traditions, calling for very specific commitments, increased commitments to address caring for our common home. Things like asking more and more countries to move money from their sovereign wealth funds out of fossil fuel investments into investments in clean energy. Asking for increased commitments from governments to help keep temperature rise to that 1.5 degree rise above pre-industrial levels that Imam Catovic mentioned. Urgings for countries to make this clean energy transition in a way that respects human rights, that provides a just transition for workers and for communities. We're here, we've been here for 30 to 35 minutes or so, people from several of the world's great religions. We seem to have gotten along pretty well. What does it mean to each of you to be doing this work as part of an extended, diverse family of faiths? Does and why does the interfaith dimension of this matter?
Let me just point to two things. Often when you see religious leaders in different communities and parts of the world, especially if we look back to history, they tend to be praying against each other and not with one another. That's because their political connections are often at odds with one another. In the climate movement, especially in the last couple of years, we've seen a tremendous change in terms of the direction of religious focus from all faith communities. It's amazing to me of two things. I'll give two concrete examples in the interest of time. One, we speak about the Pope's encyclical. I would like to say that the Islamic Declaration on Climate Change began long before the encyclical was released by Hajj Fazl Khalid and others who were it was their brainchild and their baby, and helped to nurture it over time. But very much when the Pope's encyclical came out, all of us who were on the drafting committee looked at the encyclical and took inspiration as to the structure of our words and the content of our statements. And it helped to frame, in some ways, our conversation. And what I mean to say by that, and I was told from the Buddhist, some of the members of the Buddhist Declaration drafting team, that similarly they had looked to the Islamic Climate Declaration to find insight and language that they were looking to utilize in explaining their religious tradition with regard to issues of climate and what they were calling for. The point being is that each of the traditions was speaking together, not in one voice, but many voices along the same direction, not against one another, but with one another. And one of the things that we can say, if nothing else, and this is, you can call it the hand of God, you can call it the mystery of the divine, you can call it the unexplainable. I've been around to several people, especially within State Department and other areas, in which they keep telling me at the level of governments, and I think some of my colleagues here have had similar experiences, that we can't explain how this is going so quickly. How is it that so many nations in the world got together and signed this agreement so quickly? How is it that they've come to the 55-55 requirement in order for the agreement to go live? And how is it now that all these things are happening? This was not in our plan. We planned that that's happening like quite a few years down the road, if at all, these various steps. And the only thing that comes to my mind is that the only way this is happening is that the world's faith traditions and people of faith are speaking in one voice and in a clear voice, and the power that be, whatever you want to call him or her, is listening to that voice and causing things to move. And it is a necessary component going forward as we seek to solve the problems of this world, that the faith communities who now don't pray against each other, but pray with one another for our common home, continue to have a voice, and that voice be listened to at the tables, both here and also on the other side of this wall where the negotiations are taking place.
Gopal, how about you as a Hindu? What is the interfaith dimension of this like?
It's amazing. It's really good. As Brother Saffet was saying, we're not praying against each other, we're praying with each other and for each other. Hinduism very clearly says, at least my understanding of the tradition, is that there is no monopoly on truth. It's not like the Hindus have the truth and the Muslims are wrong and the Catholics a little bit right and the Protestants are totally off. We all have access to truth, and that can be revealed in different ways. And we know with climate change, there is no one solution. There's no silver bullet. We all have to work together, the scientists, the people who do the financing, the politicians, the religious leaders, the artists. We all have to come together to address climate change. And so as society comes together to address this common global concern, the religions of the world, we're seeing over the last 7, 8, if not longer years, have come together and are increasingly saying that we're working together, we're going to address this. And it's, I think now, when we see certain political upsets in the world, at least in the Western world, there's even more need for our voices to be shared, to come together to talk as one, because people are confused, people are upset, people are hurting, they've been hurting for a long time, and people are looking for a moral, ethical way to live their life that they're not finding in certain leadership in the world. And so there's a real opportunity for not religious leaders, but people of good faith, of right mind, to come together to offer pathways to a better society. And I think, as Brother Saffet said, it is spectacular that all the countries of the world got together last year in Paris and agreed on something. You know, that seems impossible if we were to do that again this year. So it seems there was a moment, a glimmer of hope, and now we have to push forward with that.
Tomás, I know many of us have been so deeply grateful for the way in which Pope Francis has reached out to leaders and members of other faith communities. As a Catholic, what does the opportunity to work alongside people of different faiths mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we see our work as it's so important that we really work all together, and it's wonderful to see. For example, last week we were all there in the delivery of this interfaith statement, and we're very pleased and grateful for the opportunity to work all together. And here I would like to recall what I mentioned earlier, this concept of our planet Earth as our common home. And here faith communities have such an important role to remind us all. And this time when nationalism and building up walls seems to be a fashionable thing to do, that we're seeing so much division and so much fear of who's outside our border, that faith traditions have a critical role to play. I mean, by definition, all faith traditions are transnational. So there's such a wonderful opportunity here to remind our own people, I mean, of our own faith traditions and the wider society, that we are all part of one human family. So I think here we have a really important role to play, and faith traditions should continue to speak up and remind the world, remind our human family that we are one single human family. And this relates also to the theme of interconnectedness that I mentioned earlier as well from Laudato Si, that the Pope really stresses how important it is to keep in mind we're all interconnected. Everything we do to one another really has repercussions on everybody and ourselves as well. So yeah, but the concept of our common home and being one human family, I think that's a critical message that faith traditions need to continue raising.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for the chance to talk. It's Tomás Insua from the Global Catholic Climate Movement, Gopal Patel from the Bhumi Project, spelled Bhumi Project, Imam Saffet Catovic with Green Muslims of New Jersey and also affiliated with the Global Muslim Climate Network. And I'm Fletcher Harper with GreenFaith. It's been wonderful to be with you, and thanks so much. We hope you've enjoyed it.